In this week's In-Ear Insights, Katie is out in the woods being chased by raccoons and bears. So I have partner and also marketing over coffee co-host John Wall with us for this show. And today, let's talk about the metaverse. So the metaverse, both the generic term and the term that the Meta Corporation is trying to get to be popular, is essentially a couple of different technologies bundled together. On one hand, it is sort of a virtual environment powered by VR and by Meta's Oculus platform. And on the other hand, there's sort of a whole transaction and commerce system that they envision being powered in part by various blockchains of which they would administer. So these kind of things coupled together are what they're kind of thinking of as the metaverse. So John, when you hear the metaverse, what comes to mind?
The first thing is this is just classical marketing stuff of, the people building it are naming this thing and putting it out there and saying, this is the thing, but, what people are actually going to throw down money for and what it's actually going to look like may not have, anything in common with what we're looking at right now. I could easily, and I don't know, in fact, we're kind of to a point where it's been a couple months and I haven't heard of massive adoption. So as far as I'm concerned, it seems like it's starting to slip into that trough of despair.
Well, I think part of it is because, it, like you said, it's a lot of vaporware at the moment. There isn't really... I was in my Oculus headset the other night, and they've added some new features and stuff, but there's still not a metaverse environment where you can pop in. So for folks who are older, who've been in the digital landscape for a really long time, you may recall about 16 years ago was this environment called Second Life, run by Linden Labs, which was a metaverse. It was a 3D environment that was totally free form, and you could create avatars and wander around. An analogy today would be the virtual worlds like Minecraft, for example, or Roblox, where you just go in and there's not really there's nothing to win. It's just this virtual world that you spend a lot of time in. And it is kind of funny because I see Facebook essentially sort of reinventing the wheel, and the Linden Labs Second Life metaverse at its peak, I think, did have a couple of million concurrent users, and that was just with a desktop computer. You didn't need any special hardware for it, but it doesn't really exist as a coherent entity yet. There's no killer app, a start button in your Oculus headset says take me to the metaverse, and then you're up and running. It's not available. So I think being in the trough of despair is a great way to put it.
Yeah, and it's just because you build a conference center, that doesn't mean that you're going to have shows and events that are going to happen, and you see this mistake made in real life all the time of, some second-rate city that's doing terribly tries to build a conference center to bring in some action and get traffic going. And, 5 years later, the thing's being torn down or turned into some other thing because nobody wants to show up there. The most interesting stuff, you mentioned Minecraft, that is a community where people go to, and it's, kind of virtual Legos, and there's a lot of fans and a lot of activity around that, and that's good. And I've seen some crossover with Fortnite too. They've done concerts with Ariana Grande and a couple other things in that space. They have a short film festival that they run. So there's, they're kind of taking that gamer crowd and seeing if they can get them to move somewhere else. And I think the, results have only been limited. Like there's a lot of people that go to those events, but those are the people who are playing the game and they want to see what's going on. You don't have people running out saying, oh, I need to sign up for Fortnite so I can go see, what Ariana Grande is up to this week. So it's, it's like any new tech platform, you throw it out there. But yeah, it is funny for us, like having been around forever. It's like, yeah, these, when you look at Second Life, or, even I saw like the first multiplayer gaming pods in the 90s, there were people doing that with mainframes. And yeah, you need some killer content. I'm kind of surprised. I thought Beat Saber had a lot of momentum, but it seems like it's not enough to get it over the mark. And of course, all these dance games have seemed to tank and have had their day, and that seems to have faded away for now. Maybe it'll come back, but yeah, they need to get their kind of golden moment. And I don't know, what do you think? Is it, Apple has been watching this space forever too, and they're a good example of a company that would wait until it's mature and they found a vertical to go for, and they have yet to throw into the space. So that makes me think it's just even though it's been decades, we're still too early.
Well, yeah, and here's why. I mean, and for the folks who are just listening, you can't see this part, but I've got my virtual reality headset here. This is a terrible experience, right? I have this giant thing strapped to my head, and an interface that is not great, right? There's controllers and stuff like that. But fundamentally, when you think about, Apple, I think is a really great example. I'm going to take this off now. Apple's a really great example. They're not first. Apple tends to try for best, right? They were not the first MP3 player. They were not the first smartphone. They were not the first tablet computer. But they've spent a lot of time and a lot of effort on design and user experience, so that you have, today's smartphones, virtually all of them are because of the iPhone, right? No matter, who has the market share, the form factor that we enjoy in smartphones today would not have existed without the iPhone, period. Because everything up until that point was, Blackberries and stuff, and physical keyboards and stuff. The iPod itself, the idea of it just carrying around your music, the Macintosh, all these things. So Apple, to your point, has not come out with any kind of virtual reality play because you're strapping a device to your head, right? Until it is something that is a lot less cumbersome, or potentially more of the augmented reality, or maybe just simulate a better simulated environment on large scale displays. We have things like Apple TV and Amazon Fire TV and stuff, where inside of a 65-inch TV, if you're sitting in front of this thing, it's fairly close to synthetic 3D. Like, I play World of Warcraft on a 65-inch screen TV, and I sit 2 feet away from it. So I don't need to wear a headset because this thing is gigantic, right?
Yeah, it's full field of vision. And that's a great point, because we've already seen this with, like I was looking with movie theaters, where people are doing 360-degree video. The reality is, if you're trying to tell a story or do something, it's pretty much going to be within 90 degrees of action. Maybe now and then stuff will happen at 180. And for a surprise, you'd want something behind you, but you're not going to have action going on in front and in back. And that makes a huge difference in terms of bandwidth required to do it and storage for it. I don't know. What do you think about that too? That's another thing, is that we see this all the time, in that the technology is there to build kind of proof of concept, right? Like, I mean, when you look at like a Palm or Trio smartphone, a precursor to an iPhone, like, yeah, they could do this stuff, but it's just that the processors and the memory weren't there to make it really good. It just sort of worked, and it was, clunky. I mean, it was even black and white for a while before they had enough power to go to color. And it's not until you kind of cross over that line where multimedia works okay, that now suddenly the device gets really cool really fast. And I could totally see that, because we are to the point, if you get to a point where you can make a $50 headset that already has a tour of the Louvre or, the latest Star Wars movie in it, and you can just buy this thing and throw it on your head and use it, and it takes no setup, no headache, nothing. I could see that maybe giving it a little more juice. But yeah, I think in some ways maybe the tech is still not there for mass market.
Well, and this is a critical point for marketers in particular. Creating content for a metaverse is a very, very high technical hurdle, right? To create 3D content is complex. Even in Second Life, again, back in 2006, the building kit in there, it was a little more user-friendly, more accessible, but it was still not something that more than a small percentage of users did. Recently, so I went to the Macon conference in Cleveland, and I brought my GoPro 360 camera, which films in full 360-degree resolution. I brought this thing home. I recorded my session, which is about 40 minutes. I recorded my session with a separate mic and then the camera. And when I got home to try and turn it into a VR ready video, it took 500 gigabytes of my disk, right? It took literally 1/3 of my entire hard drive for one single video, and Adobe Premiere. And this is on an M1 Mac that has 64 gig of RAM, and all the bells and whistles. And it took 2.5 hours to render. and then load to YouTube. As a 51 gigabyte file by the time it was done rendering it and sending it to YouTube. And now, yes, if you have an Oculus headset and the YouTube app, you can go into my Maycon session on YouTube and experience it as if you were literally sitting in the front row, which is a pretty cool experience. But it still isn't quite there yet. Like, I didn't have the mic set up to do spatial audio, so it's a very flat sound. You don't get that stereo effect of, like, if you move your head around, the audio changes. So it's still not a truly authentic experience. And that was just to produce a single video on an app that somebody else already has within Facebook's ecosystem, within Meta's Metaverse, the YouTube app. That's just creating a single piece of content, and it took me a couple days to do it. And granted, it was messing around. I would have done it anyway, just for fun. But if you're a brand saying, okay, well, how do I get started in this thing? Well, how's your development team? How's your development team working with tools like Unity? How's your video game development team? Because a lot of the skills that you use to build a AAA title video game, you would use for the metaverse. And I would virtually guarantee that most brands are going to say, we don't have a video game team, right? We don't have those skills. And so a big problem the metaverse folks have to solve is, who's going to create content for this stuff with the technical bar being so high, at least in the first few years?
Yeah, right. Because anybody who's good at Unity is already working in a game shop. The talent is not just floating around there. So now you need to find people who want to play with Unity. And yeah, that's a pretty short list of folks to get into. So something else you said too about Minecraft, which is interesting, and this is another major hurdle for brands and marketers, is you got to pick out which metaverse you want, right? Because there's Facebook, the Meta version of Metaverse, but then to your point, there is Minecraft, which is Microsoft's cloud and environment, right? And of course, I'm sure at some point Google will have some sort of virtual environment if it seems like this thing's going to have legs. Apple may have one. And so now you're in a system of battling tech giants for whose metaverse you want to develop for. Yeah, right. And that's going to be really interesting to see how that works, as far as, do people start partnering up? Do we get a unified platform of some kind where, maybe they don't run the same, but maybe the content can easily be ported across into another environment? And sure, there's tens of millions of people over in Minecraft, but if those aren't the kind of people that buy whatever you're selling, that's of no use to you at all. Like, there's no way you're going to get a bunch of 50 somethings to go start downloading Minecraft and figure out, like, how to go get your coupon, 8 levels down in the ether or whatever. Like, that's just not going to happen.
Yeah, and then layer in the whole idea of using some of the Web3 tech to handle the purchasing, a blockchain and NFTs to handle the transaction processing, and you've got some pretty substantial obstacles to adoption in terms of what you could do, what's theoretically possible, and then what. I think it's going to be a bit before you see that, whatever that killer app is. In Second Life, the killer app was music. The killer app was the ability for musicians to play live concerts, with their avatars, and with such minimal overhead for controlling their avatars that they were able to sit down and plug their gear in and actually do a show, right? Which 16 years later isn't as revolutionary as it was back then, right? People live streaming this stuff is not exactly a big deal anymore. But the skills needed to do something like live streaming are going to be directly portable into whatever meta environment we end up being in.
Yeah, I don't know. It's going to be amazing to see. I always fall into this thing of, like, I see things like you said, talking about music. It just seems like it's a no-brainer that somebody could jump into some of these platforms and have their concert of the week. But I think, the problem is the artists that are huge enough to do it, they've already got enough income streams that they don't need to play around with it. And the ones that don't have the crowd, well, they're just kind of playing to empty rooms until they can get it up and running. But yeah, I don't know. I think that an artist that wants to just jump on a platform like that and put music out on a regular basis, that seems like a huge opportunity for me right now.
Yeah, that and anybody who is doing any kind of live event, having a 360-degree video stream that is a front row seat at the Lakers or the Celtics or at the 50-yard line in Gillette Stadium, that seems like an easy win, right? Okay, you can have the the $5,000 seat ticket experience. Well, or 60% of the experience, because you get sight and sound. You don't get the hot dog smell, but you get that experience in a way that you probably could not without forking over several months worth of your mortgage for that single day.
Yeah, that's like another huge opportunity. I just think there must be thousands of people that would be willing to pay $30 to sit at the Super Bowl. I mean, you think that something like that would fly, but again, it's the bureaucracy of there's people that are afraid that will cannibalize the ticket sales, which, given the resale market, I can't believe that's even a thought. But again, there's people where, well, that's not my job to do that. But yeah, it just seems like being able to put on the headset and watch the game of the week should be a thing. But here we are.
Exactly. It should be a thing. And the part that I think folks don't realize is the scalability of it. It's like if you have a 360-degree stream from that seat, a real person can only one real person can occupy that seat, right? But 50,000 people can occupy that stream.
Yeah, right. That seat could generate another 50, 100,000 views, a huge pile of money for that one seat where, only one physical butt will fit in there. But again, you've got to sell it to somebody. And then of course there is as soon as it hits the internet, now it's like other countries can steal it, and there's all kinds of other, crazy things that go into that. And not to mention all the TV rights are already negotiated, for all this stuff. And so that you need somebody to jump on board with that too.
Exactly. That's actually an interesting aspect too, because the way 360 video works, and I realize we're focusing on the video portion because the 3D composition portion is much more complex. But if you're a smart brand, and this is where things like those NFTs could actually come in handy, is allowing creators to remix. Like, okay, so you get here's the entire field of view stream 360 degrees, and then a subsequent creator can license part of it and say, I want to show just my version of the highlights from the game. Like, I don't want to show the whole game. I want to do my tailored version and recap, reaction videos, things like that. And they could license part of it. And then of course, the way these blockchains work, if they license it from, say, CBS Sports says, okay, well, here's your license of authenticity, which is all an NFT is. Every time then that creator distributes their content, CBS gets, of course, a cut of any money that's made on it. So there could be some decent, downstream revenue from that for brands that are adventurous enough to adopt it.
Yeah, and the whole NFT thing is, it's kind of like referring to things as consumer packaged goods or whatever. You're kind of talking about a class of things, but it doesn't really get that message across as to what these things are. And this is where, the existing environments of Minecraft and Fortnite and things like that, and World of Warcraft, where you're buying virtual goods and you actually get a feel for like, okay, I throw either real money or my coins down, and this is the thing I get in return. And yeah, maybe it is something where, when the game goes online 5 years from now, your thing evaporates, but you at least realize that, well, for 5 years, I'm having fun with this thing, and it's, no more or less a waste of my money than a magazine or, some other junk from the gas station it's worth doing. And yeah, industries can be built around it. But yeah, bundling the financial transaction system, to what you're trying to sell just serves to confuse and make things even more, put the general public, give them a fear of touching it because it's just another place where they might look stupid, so they're going to run away.
Exactly. So I'd say, wrapping up, or in terms of what brands should be thinking about now, today, and preparing for the metaverse. Obviously keep an eye on what the different options are in all these different virtual worlds, and typical social media play. If you have an ability to register your brand's trademark and handle, obviously go do that. That's kind of a no-brainer. And then I think the content creation aspect is where brands have an opportunity to be early without taking risk, right? Recording your conference sessions in 360 video and loading them into YouTube, because YouTube supports 360-degree video. That's a no-brainer, right? Yes, it's resource intensive to, compared to shooting a video on your smartphone, but it lets you get out there. It lets the content be available. When you load up, for example, the YouTube app inside the Oculus headset, the 360-degree videos are the ones that are prioritized because they want you to be able to use the full experience. So if your brand is putting up stuff in there on YouTube anyway, it will automatically be more likely to be featured in the virtual worlds than a standard video. Creating, if you have the ability and you have people who are good at it, creating spatial audio experiences. I think there's a huge cottage industry, just like there is for B-roll and stock photos and stock video. I think there's a huge untapped market for stock 360 and stock spatial audio sounds. So if you've got the gear to do it, go out and create that content. You could license it either for money as a revenue stream or just as a promotional thing. Like, hey, here's Birdsong in 360, right, with spatial audio, and anyone who needs to remix that for a virtual environment, they can get it from you and from your brand. And any other content, if you have stuff like 3D spleens and you've done some work with like 3D printers and things, all those data files have benefit, because again, they can be ported and changed formats and then made available to people who are building in these different metaverses. Those are all, to me, seems like easy ways in, easy ways for you to get known for this stuff, but without taking a lot of risk. What do you think? What are some of the other easy things that brands should be thinking about that they could do today?
Yeah, shooting 360 video just to try and do it, especially if you've got some kind of product or experience that you can show what it's like to ride in a boat or to wear these kinds of clothing or whatever, and have a completely better way to do that. And then I've been playing around with spatial audio a little bit. I'm starting to dip my toes into the water there, and it is just amazing. I mean, the sound is a full leap up over everything else that's out there now. But the question is, who's willing to pay for it? Who cares? And it's, I don't know. We're going to hit a point where either headsets or monitors that are so huge that you're fully immersed in, that's when that spatial audio becomes next level. Because like you said, if you're showing your last keynote and the sound is just basically mono, right? It's coming from a single point. That's not a big deal until you start turning around in the 360 environment and you don't feel like you're there. But for things where it's entertainment or you're trying to really get across being in another environment, spatial audio is what's going to kick it up to the next level. So yeah, I think it is. It's just like, find one of the things that you want to play with. If you have any interest in gaming, obviously go over there, because there's going to be a huge demand for talent over there when that comes around. And there's huge demand for talent there now, and it's only going to get worse. But yeah, this is the time to play around with the toys and at least just try and figure out how to make it work. It's kind of the fun part of it.
Yeah. And I would say also for marketers individually, get some experience being in a virtual world. Sign up for a Minecraft account. It's like $26 for the client, and then just play around and just get a sense of what it's like to operate inside of a persistent virtual environment. Play World of Warcraft for a month. Play Call of Duty. Play something where there's a world that stays on, whether or not you're in it. Roblox, things like that, so that you can see all the different mechanisms there, because there's always things like chats, voice chats. There's communities, groups, guilds, tribes, different regions and maps and things. Because all of those basic navigational skills will be things that you will need to understand, so that when your brand opens up its pop-up shop or whatever on the virtual Fifth Avenue, you will know, you'll have a better idea of what to expect. You'll know that, for example, flying body parts without a person attached to them is a possibility, particularly in an unmoderated system. Or people leaving virtual graffiti can be a potential problem. So if you don't know and don't have experiences in virtual environments, you're going to be at a disadvantage for competitors who do.
Yeah. And same thing with all the supporting communities that come around that stuff, Discord and Twitch and however else people are communicating. If they don't have active chat, if that's not the main way that they're communicating, learning about how all that stuff works will give you more tools for when you do have to go down that road with your own brand.
Exactly. And the last thing I would suggest is a lot of these technologies, you're probably looking at, I can't say for sure, but you're probably looking at like 5 years at least down the road before, and it's not clear who the winner will be. I know there's companies like Facebook making a lot of noise about it, but there's nothing that says, in their platform that's so killer that declares them the preemptive winner. But this is the time to start cultivating talent now, right? If you seriously believe that there's legs to this thing, and that your sector of the industry will be impacted sooner rather than later. Like accounting firms, probably not going to be huge in the metaverse immediately, but entertainment firms, 100% will be impacted sooner rather than later. You should be cultivating talent now. You should be looking at incubators, funding courses, looking at feeder programs out of high schools and colleges and universities to say, okay, who can, what kind of talent is being created for this now? What are the skills that are likely going to be needed, like 3D experience, and do we have talent pipelines for that anywhere on our roadmap? And if you don't, and you think that it's going to be a thing, this is the time to start doing it, because by the time the need arises, that talent's going to be crazy overpriced, and you're going to get locked out of the market. But if you've got a feeder program, say at the local university, that you're sponsoring as a brand, guess who they're going to work for first?
Yeah, right. Or even get to the point where you have a lab where people can come play with this stuff. Because I'm sure, and we already know that, as you've proven with your video, that it's going to be a huge hardware commitment. So if you've got a place for somebody to dig in and play with this stuff, that's a great way to get the community built around your own, your own organization.
Exactly. So lots of early opportunities for forward-thinking brands to start playing with the stuff without, throwing down millions of dollars. And you will still generate usable content, even if the metaverse never comes to pass. Having these technologies in market now and creating virtual things certainly is going to be useful for your brand. So give that stuff a try. If you've got comments or questions or things that you're trying in one or more virtual worlds and you want to talk about it or share it, pop on over to our free Slack group. Go to trustinsights.ai/analytics for marketers, where you and over 2,500 other marketers are asking and answering each other's questions every day. We don't have virtual avatars yet, but we do have some great conversations. And wherever it is that you watch or listen to the show, if there's a platform you'd rather have it on, visit trustinsights.ai/TI podcast, where you can find us on almost every major platform. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll talk to you next week.